Julian welcomed the bride of her only son, Cameron Rowland. With a heartfelt and cheery smile, held her hands as she closed her eyes and said a little prayer. "Rose, this would be a beautiful beginning for you and my son Cameron. Amen." As soon as she opened her eyes, she spotted a not common but familiar birthmark on Rose's hand. Immediately she saw the birthmark, she froze. Different thoughts began to run through her mind. Could Rose be the person she is thinking it might be? She thought within herself. Julian is 62 years old and lived a little far away from Cameron, her son. When Cameron moved to California 3 years ago, he had not returned home ever since to visit his mother, Julian. Mother and son were always on phone. These two were involved in long hours of conversation with each other when Cameron had just moved in the first few months. However, as time went on, the calls were no longer frequent as it used to since Cameron got busier at work. He had promised a couple of times to visit his mom, but the time never came for him. Julian had never been separated from her son since he was younger, and of course, it did have a toll on her. She misses her son so very much. But Cameron is 31 years old now, and Julian knew he had to live his life. Julian had left everything to fate, but she could not stop thinking about one thing, as Cameron had made it known to her during one of the conversations they had, that he lived in a large apartment all by himself. Julian gets worried each time she thinks about this, because she had known her son to be an introvert and feared he would not be able to have friends or neighbors come around from time to time. Julian never let her son know how she felt about all of that, even as she had sleepless nights because of these fears. On a fateful evening, just a little above 1 year that Cameron had settled in California, Julian's phone rang and it was her son. Cameron said, "Mom, how are you doing? I called to let you know that I found someone special, nice, and beautiful. Her name is Rose, Mom." Julian sensed how excited her son was, and besides, Cameron had never told her about any girl before now. "She must be very special," Julian said. She knew this one was special. But there was more to Rose's story that no one would ever think of. 2 years later, Cameron mentioned to Julian, his mom, that he had asked Rose to marry him, and they had also fixed their wedding date. Julian was excited about the news and couldn't wait to set hers on her daughter-in-law-to-be, and so she started preparations immediately. She had bought numerous gifts for the husband and wife-to-be and had even written down some beautiful words that she would have to say to her daughter-in-law on their wedding day, but in a moment, these would not matter to her anymore. Cameron and Rose decided that they would be having the wedding in Ohio, where his mom lives, and this news gladdens Julian's heart as soon as they informed her. She would not be traveling to California so far away. However, this also meant that there is a lot of work to be done by Julian to put all things in place for the wedding. Julian was not bothered about the stress at all. This is her only son we are talking about here. Julian willingly fixed all that was needed to be fixed, and she did them happily. Nonetheless, something heartbreaking was about to threaten Julian's happiness, unfortunately. As the wedding day came, Julian showed off in her best dress. She marched gracefully to the wedding venue. Julian is unaware of the calamity that was waiting to be unleashed. Despite the fact that Julian over the phone had spoken to Rose many times before the wedding, she had not quite seen her pictures. So she was definitely eager to see the beautiful angel Cameron her son was about to marry and have for a wife. When Julian got to the venue of the wedding, she caught sight of her son, walked quickly towards him, and affectionately embraced him. Julian was very proud of the grown man her son has become, but little did she know that the next person who walked in on them was about to get the wonderful moment ruined. Julian was still pampering the groom when she felt some warm hands around her back. As soon as she turned, she saw a beautifully dressed, gorgeous lady in white flowing gown. The young lady gave Julian the most beautiful smile ever and said, "It's me, Rose." Julian responded, "Of course, my darling. Only the bride is permitted to wear white, beautiful dress today." They both laughed. "You are indeed worth it, honey," Julian added. She grabbed Rose's hands, closed her eyes, and said, "Rose, this would be a beautiful beginning for you and my son Cameron. Amen." Cameron then walked away as he was called upon. As soon as Julian opened her eyes and was about to kiss Rose's hands as she lifted them up to her face, she saw something that made her halt. Julian's whole world was about to melt into tears. As she held Rose's hands, she spotted an exact familiar mark. Julian was so terrified that her hands began to shake. Rose, now worried, asked, "Ma'am, what seems to be the problem?" "Not at all. There's no problem," Julian responded, but she continued to stare at the mark. This mark was the exact same mark that was on her own daughter's hands before she went missing. They tried all possible means and efforts to locate her so many years ago, but were never successful. Julian never saw her daughter again until now. All of the depressions, hurtful feelings, anger she had managed to overcome over the years had just strongly reappeared. Julian took Rose's hand one more time and stared intensely into her curious eyes. At this time, so many thoughts went through Julian's mind. Could Rose be my missing girl? Am I missing up something with this striking resemblance? Her lips, her brows, what am I missing? She is just like my little girl. Julian thought to herself. The more she stared at the bride, the more she noticed and get convinced within herself. Julian knew that the only thing that could help now isn't just her inner conviction she is feeling at this time. She needed more than just conviction. There should be a proof or something. Julian could not dare to say anything that could threaten the wedding, especially when there was no solid proof yet. Rose means a lot to Cameron, my son, she said to herself. But she was not about to keep shut. What if this was true? There has to be a way for the truth to be revealed, if there was any at all. So Julian asked Rose, "My darling, where are my in-laws to be seated?" "I'll show you," Rose replied. She walked Julian to where her parents were seated. If there was any truth or hidden truth at all, Rose's parents would definitely know. Both families exchanged greetings, and Julian quickly requested to speak with Rose's parents in private, as she didn't quite know how they would take it after she might have said what she had in mind. However, Julian had come very close to the truth. She had come very close to solving the mystery of her missing daughter. Nothing else mattered now. Julian said softly as she took a deep breath, "I don't know how this might sound. Did you adopt Rose?" As soon as Julian asked this, the couple faces turned pale. How did this woman know about this? They had never told anyone the truth or secret about adopting Rose. The couple stared at each other and inaudibly communicated with their eyes. Rose's mom said something. This increased Julian's fears. "Yes, we adopted our darling Rose." Julian didn't wait for other things they had to say. She began to pant really hard and asked, "Do you know where her parents are? How was she adopted? How old was Rose when you adopted her?" Julian went on and on. She pulled Rose's mother's hands and wrapped hers over them as though she were in a desperate situation. "Please, how did you adopt her? What is the story?" Julian asked again. Rose's parents at this time knew something was not right. But whatever it may be, they could not hide the truth anymore, so they told it all. Rose's father began, "We found Rose on the street and took her in. Though we had reported to the police station but no one came for the child, we then adopted Rose legally." Julian opened her mouth in astonishment after she heard all that were said and started to weep bitterly. That very first moment when Julian looked into Rose's eyes was when she realized it was her missing child. But she couldn't figure. There was one more thing to be revealed that would finally confirm Julian's suspicion. As they continued with the discussion, no one knew that Rose was watching and following their body movements and languages. Initially, Rose was watching from a distance, but as soon as Julian began to weep, she changed her position, close enough to eavesdrop on every bit of their conversations. Rose heard when Julian mentioned that her biological daughter had gone missing 28 years ago. They were on a family vacation in California, and her daughter was only 2 years old at the time. Rose's eyes, her lips, voice, and the birthmark on her hand are just exactly as her missing daughter's. "Did you just say California?" Rose's mother asked. "That is where we found Rose," she added. As soon as Rose heard those words from her mother, she broke down in tears and screamed out while running towards them. A supposed memorable day for her, as she had imagined, is now turning into a nightmare right before her eyes. If it was true that her soon-to-be mother-in-law were her biological mom, that automatically makes Cameron her brother, which meant No wedding. Someone tell me what's going on? Is it true I was adopted? Rose asked with tears running down her cheeks. Rose's parents held on to her. Darling, it was not like this we wanted you to find out, her father said. We found you in California during one of our vacations there. We looked for your parents, but no one came for you. We couldn't leave you behind. We are so sorry, sweetheart. Rose, who was still in tremor, turned to Julian. As she looked closely, she saw that she truly looked like her. Julian began, with tears still rushing down her eyes. I had waited for a day like this to come for years. Even though it seemed that all hope was lost, I never stopped hoping and thinking about you, my baby. I desired so much for this day to come. I am so sorry, my baby girl. Julian continued weeping as she held Rose closer to herself. Rose hesitated for a bit, but could not resist Julian's continuous weeping. That day was a bittersweet reunion for both mother and daughter, as well as for Rose's parents. What then would happen to Cameron and Rose is just one more question that needed some answers. In the midst of all that was going on, Cameron walked in. Am I missing anything? He said softly. As soon as Rose saw him, she ran towards him and cried on his shoulder. The wedding is off. My mother-in-law-to-be is my biological mother, she said. I am so sorry this wedding has to end now, but always remember that I love you so much, Cameron. No one knew how Cameron was going to react to this, but he smiled and looked straight into Rose's eyes as he held her hands. My darling, we can still live together if you want. Rose, at this time, was so confused. She loved Cameron so much, but she cannot marry her own brother. Cameron had told Rose virtually everything about himself, but there was one thing he didn't tell Rose. This was when Cameron disclosed that he was not the biological son of Julian. When I couldn't find you, Cameron became my only solace, and I took him in and cared for him just as I would for you. I will be so honored to have you both come together as one in holy matrimony, Julian said with happy tears flowing from her eyes. The turnaround of event by this revelation from Cameron and his mother made everyone happy. The wedding went on as planned, and it was indeed a beautiful reunion. After the wedding, Julian and Rose went for a DNA test, and the test confirmed that indeed, Julian was the biological mother of Rose. How beautiful. Thank you so much for watching. Please do not forget to hit the like, share, and subscribe buttons. You should also turn on your notification bell for more inspiring videos like this.